Chapter 1. The woods whisper back. The wilderness has always carried with it a strange duality. On one hand, it is a place of peace, towering trees that sway gently in the wind, rivers that hum like a lullaby, and the clear, unpolluted sky glittering with stars. On the other, the woods conceal something older, something that watches, waits, and listens. People say the deeper you camp into the wild, the less you are truly alone. And sometimes, the silence isn't silence at all, it's breathing. Most of the stories I've collected begin the same way, with laughter, with a backpack slung over one shoulder, with marshmallows and firewood. The part that no one expects is how quickly the forest turns. One wrong sound, one misplaced shadow, and suddenly, everything changes. The Navajo call it Yinaldlushi, a word translated crudely in English as skinwalker. But the name doesn't carry the weight of what it means. A skinwalker is not simply a monster. It is a witch, a shapeshifter, something that wears human skin like a mask. Something that knows you. Something that learns you. The stories you are about to hear are told by people who once thought of the woods as safe. They don't tell these tales for entertainment. They tell them as warnings. And if you ever find yourself camping where the trees grow too thick, where your phone has no signal, where your fire seems too small to keep away the dark, remember these voices. Because sometimes, the woods whisper back. And if you listen too closely, the voice you hear may not be your own. This first account came from a man named Daniel, a camper who, to this day, refuses to set foot in the wilderness again. What he experienced wasn't a campfire story told secondhand. It was something he lived through, something that carved into his memory like the mark of a scar. He swore to me, out there, something was imitating us. It wasn't just an animal. It was smarter, and it wanted us to know we weren't alone. His story begins on a cool autumn night, miles from the nearest highway. Chapter 2, Story 1. The vanishing campfire. Daniel and his two college friends, Ryan and Chloe, had been camping together since their freshman year. It was their tradition. Every October, they'd pick a spot deep in the wilderness, hike in with their packs, and stay for a weekend. They wanted to escape cell service, assignments, and city noise. But this year, they chose a different location. Instead of the well-worn state park trails, Ryan suggested a remote patch of forest near the New Mexico border. It was wild country, no ranger stations, no mapped campsites, no other people. Just endless trees, sandstone ridges, and silence. To Ryan, that made it perfect. To Chloe, it was unsettling. They set up camp by dusk, building a fire pit in the clearing. The flames licked upward, illuminating their circle of folding chairs. The forest pressed in around them, black and endless. The first hour was ordinary. They cooked sausages on sticks, laughed about old professors, and traded ghost stories. It was the kind of night that makes you forget the dangers of the world. But then, Daniel noticed something small. The fire dimmed. At first, he thought it was just his eyes adjusting to the dark. But the crackling, steady flames seemed to shrink, even though the logs were untouched. Sparks hissed into the night, but the fire grew weaker, until it was no more than a struggling orange glow. What the hell? Ryan muttered, crouching down with a stick to stir the embers. The logs should have been blazing. They were dry, seasoned wood. He swore under his breath and tossed in more twigs. Nothing. The fire refused to catch. Chloe laughed nervously. Okay, that's creepy. Are we cursed or something? Daniel didn't laugh. He was staring at the tree line. His gut told him they weren't alone. The sound came next. A snap, the distinct crunch of a branch breaking under weight. Not a rabbit. Not a deer. Too deliberate. Too heavy. Ryan straightened, scanning the trees. Did you guys hear that? Daniel nodded slowly. Chloe reached for the flashlight at her feet, her hand trembling. Before she could click it on, a voice called out from the trees. It was Ryan's voice. Hey, come here. Check this out. The three froze. Because Ryan was sitting right there, inches from Daniel. For a moment, nobody spoke. The forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. Ryan's face drained of color. That wasn't me, he whispered. The fire crackled once, but the flame stayed low, as if they too were suffocating under the weight of something unseen. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. The voice in the woods called again, this time sharper, angrier. Hey, I said come here. It was identical to Ryan's tone, but wrong, like a recording played back through broken speakers. Chloe dropped the flashlight. It rolled into the dirt, spinning its beam across the clearing. For a split second, the light hit something between the trees. A shape. Pale. Watching. And then it was gone. That was only the beginning. Daniel would later say it felt like the forest was testing them, stripping away their safety one piece at a time. First the fire. Then the voice. Then something worse. Because the night wasn't even half over. Chapter 3. The creature in the brush. The clearing had gone cold. The fire sputtered with a weak, unnatural glow, barely enough to push back the dark. The three of them sat frozen, each clinging to silence as though sound itself might draw the thing closer. Daniel's ears strained, catching every tiny movement. The whisper of wind through pine needles. The flutter of wings in the distance. And then, snap. Another branch. Closer this time. Heavy. Deliberate. Chloe whispered, "We should leave." Ryan shook his head. "We can't just run into the woods blind. We'll get lost." But Daniel wasn't listening to either of them. His eyes were locked on the tree line, where the flashlight beam had briefly caught something pale. Something shaped like a person, but wrong. Too tall. Too still. The voice came again. Softer this time. Closer. Come here. It wasn't shouting anymore. It was beckoning, coaxing, like a fisherman tugging at a line. And it wasn't Ryan's voice anymore. It was Chloe's. Her face went white. "That's me," she stammered. "That's my voice." The sound of dry leaves shifting made all three snap their heads toward the brush. Something moved between the trees, circling them. It didn't charge. It didn't retreat. It simply paced, the sound of twigs snapping under its weight echoing from one side of the clearing to the other. Ryan grabbed a hatchet from his pack and stood, though his hands trembled. "Who's out there?" he shouted. His words cracked. "Show yourself." The woods went silent. Then, slowly, a laugh. It was Daniel's laugh. The same cadence, the same pitch, echoing from the brush. Except Daniel hadn't moved. His own throat clenched in horror at the sound of himself mocking him from the trees. Ryan raised the hatchet higher, scanning. His breathing quickened. "It's messing with us. Whatever it is, it knows us." Daniel's gut twisted. The Navajo stories he had heard as a kid came rushing back. Skinwalkers could wear the shape of an animal, a man, or even voices. They didn't hunt like normal predators. They stalked. They played with their prey until fear hollowed them out. And then they struck. The brush on the far side of the clearing rattled violently. Branches swayed as something massive moved just out of sight. Chloe screamed and grabbed Daniel's arm. "It's coming in." Ryan lifted the hatchet toward the trees, his knuckles white. "Stay back." But what emerged wasn't a full figure. Not yet. Just fragments. First, two pale hands gripping a tree trunk, long-fingered, almost human but twisted at the joints. Then, a flash of a face, gone before the light could fully catch it. A grin, too wide. Eyes, gleaming like wet stones. And then, silence again. The fire guttered once more, shrinking to almost nothing. Daniel realized, with horror, that the thing wanted the dark. It wanted them blind. Chloe whispered a prayer under her breath. Ryan's chest heaved, every muscle taut. And then, from the trees, Daniel's voice called again. "This way. Hurry. Follow me." Except the real Daniel was rooted in place, clutching Chloe's wrist so hard it hurt. The mimicry wasn't just a trick. It was a lure. And if one of them broke, if fear drove them into the dark, they knew they'd never come back. They didn't know it yet, but the thing in the brush wasn't done circling. It was waiting. Testing. And by dawn, Daniel would swear on his life that something followed them even after they left those woods. But that part comes later. The night still had horrors left to show them. Chapter 4. Escape at dawn. The clearing was no longer a campsite. It was a trap. The fire had dwindled to a faint ember, offering barely enough light to outline the terrified faces of Daniel, Ryan, and Chloe. Beyond that thin circle of orange glow, the forest seemed alive, pulsing with something ancient and hateful. The mimicry had stopped. No more voices. No more laughter. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. And silence, Daniel realized, was worse. At least when it spoke, they knew where it was. But Ryan gripped the hatchet like a lifeline. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "It wants us boxed in." Chloe shook her head violently. "We'll get lost. If we leave the fire." "What fire?" Daniel cut her off, pointing to the dying embers. "That thing's killing it. It doesn't want us to see." The words barely left his mouth before the sound returned. Footsteps circling, moving closer. Leaves crunching under deliberate weight. One step at a time. Ryan snapped. With a shaky breath, he swung the hatchet at the darkness. "You think we are scared of you?" His voice cracked into a scream. "Come out. Show yourself." The woods answered. From the tree line, less than 20 feet away, something leaned just enough into the faint glow to be seen. At first glance, it looked human. A man, maybe, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. But its head tilted unnaturally far to the side, almost upside down, like a broken doll trying to study them. Its face was stretched, pale, its grin far too wide. Chloe shrieked. Ryan stumbled back, dropping the hatchet. The thing didn't move closer. It didn't lunge. It simply stood, cocking its head back and forth, as though enjoying the fear bleeding from their bodies. Then, it blinked out. Not ran. Not faded. 1 second it was there. The next, it was gone. Daniel's chest seized. Pack. Now. They scrambled, fumbling in the dirt, throwing gear into their bags without care. Tent stakes still in the ground, food half buried. None of it mattered. They just needed to leave. As Daniel slung his pack over his shoulder, the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't mimicking them. It was something else. Something guttural. A wet, rasping whisper that crawled through the clearing like smoke. "Don't leave," Chloe bolted. She didn't wait for the others. She sprinted into the woods, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Ryan cursed and chased after her, yelling her name. Daniel hesitated. Running meant plunging headfirst into the dark. But staying meant waiting for the thing to step closer. He grabbed the hatchet from the dirt and followed. The forest closed in immediately. The weak glow of their camp was swallowed by blackness. Branches clawed at their arms and faces. The sound of footsteps wasn't just behind them anymore. It was beside them. Ahead of them. The thing was pacing them, herding them deeper. Chloe's sobs rang out ahead. "This way. I see something." Her flashlight beam caught a figure standing between the trees. For a moment, hope surged. Maybe another camper, a hunter, someone human. But as the light steadied, the truth sank in. It was Chloe. Her own face, staring back at her, smiling. She screamed so violently it ripped through the forest. Ryan tackled her, dragging her off the path, forcing her forward. "Don't look. Just run." Daniel's lungs burned. His vision blurred. Every muscle screamed to stop, but the thought of turning back was worse. He knew, deep in his bones, that if he looked behind him, he wouldn't survive the night. The forest seemed endless. But at last, the horizon broke with the faintest glow of grey. Dawn. They burst out of the tree line, collapsing onto the gravel of an old logging road. The rising sun painted the sky in pale light, and for the first time in hours, Daniel could see clearly. Nothing was behind them. No footsteps. No laughter. No mimicry. Just the silent forest, indifferent and still. The three of them sat in the dirt, shaking, unable to speak. When Daniel finally turned back to look, the tree line seemed to breathe. And for a fraction of a second, he swore he saw it there, standing just beyond the shadows. Watching. But it didn't follow. Because skinwalkers don't need to chase. They wait. They linger. They remember you. And for Daniel, Ryan, and Chloe, the woods would never feel empty again. That was the first story. But the woods hold more than one nightmare. The next comes from a hunter who never intended to camp at all. Chapter 5, Story 2, The Hunter Who Never Returned. If Daniel's account carried the raw panic of survival, the second story has an even darker weight. Because this one doesn't end with escape. It was told to me by the brother of a man named Marcus Hayes, an experienced hunter who knew the wild better than most. Marcus grew up in northern Arizona, on the edge of Navajo Nation land. He had tracked elk and mule deer since he was a teenager. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. But even men who know the woods can underestimate what's inside them. In November of 1997, Marcus set out for a 3-day solo hunting trip in the Carrizo Mountains. He had his rifle, his supplies, his compass. He left a note for his family, as he always did, and promised to be back before the weekend was over. But he never returned. What I'm about to tell you comes from Marcus's hunting journal, found in his pack weeks later, and from the search team that uncovered pieces of what happened in those mountains. Day 1 in his journal was ordinary. The entries were about weather, clear skies, cold morning frost, and tracks he had found. His handwriting was steady, confident. Nothing unusual. Day 2 was different. The handwriting was uneven, sentences cut short. He wrote that he had felt a presence shadowing him in the pines. He described hearing a man's cough behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. Later, he heard the sound of his own boots crunching on leaves, except he wasn't moving. That night, he built a fire. His last full entry reads, "Something is walking the edge of camp. Sounds like it's circling. Not an animal, too quiet. Sometimes it whistles. I swear it's whistling my father's tune. I won't sleep tonight." The search team found his fire pit exactly where his journal described it. Half-burnt logs, footprints around the ashes. But the footprints weren't his alone. They were barefoot, human-shaped. And they circled the fire again and again, like a predator studying prey. Marcus's trail vanished a few miles from camp. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just gone. But searchers found something else. About 50 yards off the trail, wedged between 2 rocks, was Marcus's rifle. The barrel bent, as if by impossible strength. The last page of his journal, crumpled at the bottom of the pack, had only 3 words scrawled across it. "It has me." His family never saw him again. No body was recovered. His brother told me, voice shaking, that Navajo neighbors warned them not to search too far, not to call its name, not to follow the whistling. The lawmen called it a disappearance. The locals called it something older. They said Marcus had been taken. And if you believe the stories, the Carrizo Mountains still echo with his whistle when the sun goes down. That was the second story. One where the woods didn't give the man back. But the next one? The next one is worse, because it didn't happen to a hunter. Chapter 6. The whistling in the pines. The Hayes case was terrifying because Marcus was a seasoned woodsman. But what haunts people most is when something comes after families. People who aren't prepared, who just want to spend a night under the stars. This story was told by a woman named Carla, who swore she would never take her children camping again. It was the summer of 2004. Carla and her husband, David, drove with their 2 kids, Ethan, age 8, and Lily, age 6, to a small campground in northern New Mexico. Unlike Daniel or Marcus, they weren't miles from civilization. The campground had picnic tables, fire rings, even a gravel parking lot. Families came there often. To Carla, it felt safe. That first night was perfect. They roasted hot dogs, made s'mores, and told the kids ghost stories until they were too tired to stay awake. By 10 o'clock, they zipped up the tent, tucked their children into sleeping bags, and drifted into a peaceful sleep. But at 2:37 a.m., Carla woke up. She didn't know why at first. There was no thunder, no car lights, no movement in the tent. Just a sound. A whistle. It was faint, coming from the trees beyond the campground. At first, she thought it was another camper. But the pattern stopped her cold. It wasn't random. It was a tune. 3 notes, repeated, soft and steady. She sat up, listening. And then, from the opposite side of the campground, came the exact same whistle. Her skin prickled. Someone, or something, was answering. Carla shook David awake, whispering what she heard. He brushed it off, saying it was probably kids playing a prank. But when the whistling moved closer, circling their tent, he sat up, his expression hard. The sound didn't come from one place anymore. It came from everywhere. Behind the car. From the picnic table. From the brush. Soft, deliberate, as if the trees themselves were mocking them. Then came the voice. "Mommy." It was Lily's voice. Clear. "Close." Carla froze. Lily was asleep right beside her. She turned, shining the small lantern at her daughter's face. The girl was still bundled in a sleeping bag, eyes closed, breathing steady. But outside the tent, "Mommy!" It called again. David unzipped the tent a fraction of an inch, peering out into the black. The fire pit was nothing but a ring of glowing ash. The night beyond was endless. And then, footsteps. Small, quick, like a child running in circles around their campsite. Lily stirred, half awake. "Mommy, who's out there?" she mumbled. Carla pulled her daughter close. "Don't listen. Just stay down." David crawled out of the tent with the lantern, rifle clutched in his other hand. His boots crunched on the gravel. "Who's there?" he barked into the night. Silence. Then, softly, from just beyond the ring of light, "Daddy." It was Ethan's voice this time. But Ethan was still inside the tent, fast asleep. Carla remembers the next part in flashes. David shouting. The sound of movement in the brush. Something tall, pale, darting between trees, too fast for human eyes to follow. The whistling, louder now, shrill, disorienting, coming from every direction at once. And then, the zipper of the tent sliding down on its own. Carla lunged, yanking it shut and holding it closed with both hands, heart hammering against her ribs. She whispered prayers over and over, feeling the pressure of something pressing from the outside, testing the thin nylon wall. When dawn finally broke, the campsite was still. The whistling was gone. David was crouched by the fire pit, shaking, rifle still in hand. But in the dirt, surrounding their tent, were footprints. Not boots. Not sneakers. Bare feet. Too long. Too wide. Circling them in dozens of overlapping loops, as if something had danced all night just inches away. Carla said that was the last time she ever camped. 4 weeks afterward, Ethan complained of hearing whistling outside his bedroom window at night. And if you ask her about it today, she'll tell you the same thing she told me: the woods aren't safe. Not even the ones with campgrounds and picnic tables. Because when they come for you, it doesn't matter where you are. But the horror didn't stop there. Because not all families escaped with nothing but memories. The next story is proof of that. Chapter 7, Story 3, The Desert Campground. If Carla's story was a warning, then the next one is the nightmare version of it. Because sometimes, the thing in the woods doesn't just circle. Sometimes, it steps into the light. This story comes from a retired park ranger named Miguel Ortiz, who worked the high desert of Utah for nearly 20 years. In 2011, he responded to a frantic call from a small family campground near Moab. What he found that night still keeps him awake. The family was from Colorado, Tom and Julia Pierce, and their 2 daughters, Hannah, age 9, and Sophie, age 11. They had pitched their tent in the Red Desert, a wide-open space with sandstone cliffs looming in the distance. Unlike the thick pine forests of New Mexico, this place was barren, almost lunar. You could see for miles. Or so you thought. Tom told Miguel that everything was normal until about 1 a.m. That's when Hannah woke her parents, whispering that someone was calling her name. Julia assumed it was a dream. But when she leaned out of the tent, she swore she heard it too. Hannah, the voice was faint, stretched thin across the desert air, but close enough to raise every hair on her arms. Tom grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the open ground. Nothing. Just sand, sagebrush, and the cliffs beyond. But then Sophie sat up, trembling. "Mom. Dad. Hannah's outside." Julia froze. Hannah was still in her sleeping bag. But Sophie was pointing at the tent wall, where a shadow flickered, a small figure, the shape of a child, standing just beyond the nylon. Tom unzipped the tent and burst out, light cutting across the desert floor. The figure was gone. But the voice wasn't. This time, it came from behind him. "Dad. Over here." It was Hannah's voice. Tom spun, flashlight beam shaking. He shouted her name, heart pounding, but the real Hannah was crying inside the tent, clutching her mother. And then, footsteps. Bare. Running. Circling the tent. The sound of 2, maybe 3 sets, darting too fast for Tom to follow with the beam. He shouted into the night, threatening to call the rangers. That was when he noticed something that froze his blood. The footprints in the sand weren't just circling. They were leading away. Toward the cliffs. And they weren't child-sized. They were long. Distorted. Human, but not. Miguel said he arrived at the campsite an hour later. The family was huddled by their car, refusing to go near the tent. The girls wouldn't speak, just stared at the cliffs as if waiting for something to return. Miguel walked the site with his flashlight. He confirmed what Tom had seen, barefoot tracks in the sand, circling the tent again and again before trailing off toward the rocks. But there was something worse. Near the base of the cliff, where the prints ended, Miguel found a second set. Smaller. Fresh. Children's footprints. And there were no children missing. At least, none reported. The Pierces drove home that night and never camped again. Miguel filed the report, but like all stories like this, it was buried in paperwork. He told me he doesn't even know why he kept it. Maybe because of one last detail he couldn't shake. When he searched the tent before leaving, he noticed something scratched into the inside wall, near where Hannah had slept. 3 words, carved deep with something sharp, "Let her out." That was the third story. But there's one more. One that comes not from memory or journals, but from recordings. The kind of evidence you can still hear if you dare to press play. Chapter 8. The Eyes Beyond the Tent. Some stories end with silence. Others end with absence. But this one ends with something seen. Something that, once glimpsed, cannot be forgotten. The final story I collected came from a pair of cousins, Mark and Adrian, who camped in southern Utah in the summer of 2016. They weren't children, nor inexperienced. Both were in their mid-20s, seasoned hikers who prided themselves on venturing where most people wouldn't go. They camped in a dry wash near a canyon, the kind of place where starlight alone could light the ground. The night was calm, still, and open. Their fire burned bright against the red rock walls. By midnight, they retreated to their tent. The desert was quiet, save for the occasional skitter of lizards. Adrian fell asleep almost instantly, but Mark stayed awake, scrolling through his phone until the battery drained. When the light finally died, the darkness around him felt heavy, pressing against the thin nylon walls. That was when he heard it. Breathing. Not snoring, not the natural rhythm of Adrian asleep beside him. This was outside. Slow. Wet. As if something was standing just beyond the fabric, inhaling them in. Mark froze, barely daring to move. His pulse hammered in his ears. The breathing grew louder, closer, until it was directly against the tent wall. And then, a hand pressed against it. The nylon stretched inward, a clear outline of fingers, long, thin, too many joints. Mark clamped a hand over his mouth to keep from screaming. The hand slowly dragged across the wall, the sound of skin sliding on fabric sending shivers down his spine. Adrian stirred. "What the hell?" he whispered, but Mark shushed him violently. The hand lifted away. Silence. They thought maybe it had gone. Maybe it was some trick of the dark. But then, from the corner of the tent, came a sound neither of them would ever forget. A laugh. Not loud. Not hysterical. Just a soft chuckle, right at their ear level. Adrian snapped. He unzipped the tent in one furious motion, shining his flashlight into the night. And that's when they saw them. Not one. Not two. But dozens of eyes, reflecting in the light. Lined along the canyon wall. Staring. Blinking. Waiting. The cousin screamed, scrambling out of the tent, fumbling for the fire. But the fire had died. Only blackened logs remained. The desert was swallowed by dark, the canyon walls alive with glints of wet, inhuman eyes. They didn't think. They ran. Mark told me later that he doesn't remember the trail, doesn't remember the miles, only the sound, bare feet slapping against stone, chasing them, keeping pace, laughing. Not one voice, but many. When they stumbled back into their truck at dawn, they locked the doors and sat there shaking until the sun rose fully. Adrian swore never to speak of it again. Mark tried to rationalize it, tried to convince himself it was coyotes, or other campers, or exhaustion. But there was one detail that made that impossible. When he went to shake the dirt from his pack the next morning, he found a single print pressed into the sand beneath it. A handprint. But the palm was backward. That was the fourth story. But not the last. Because stories like these are still happening. Tonight, tomorrow, every time someone dares to sleep where the wild runs deep. And sometimes, the only proof left behind are the eyes. Chapter 9. Story 4. The last transmission. The last story doesn't come from memory, or journals, or whispers in a tent. It comes from a recording. In 2019, two amateur radio enthusiasts from Flagstaff were camping in the Kaibab National Forest. Both men, Caleb and Jordan, were into survivalism, and they often brought portable radios on their trips, tuning into frequencies just for fun. That night, they weren't trying to find anything. But something found them. Around 11:45 p.m., they caught a signal. At first, it was static, harsh bursts of white noise, popping through the desert night. Caleb joked that maybe it was a trucker. Jordan turned the dial slowly. Then, through the fuzz, came a voice. A man's voice. Strained. Whispering. "If anyone can hear, please." The two men glanced at each other. Caleb leaned toward the mic. "This is Camp Alpha." "Who's calling?" Static. Then the voice again, clearer this time. "It's right outside." "It looks like me." Jordan frowned. "What the hell?" The voice went on, frantic now. "Don't listen to it. Don't follow it. If you hear yourself, run." Then, laughter. Not over the radio. From the trees. Both men froze, eyes wide. The laugh was close, too close. Caleb grabbed a flashlight, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just empty woods. But when he swung the beam back to camp, his blood turned to ice. Jordan was standing there. But Jordan was also standing beside him. The figure in the light looked identical. Same jacket, same boots, same terrified expression. For a long moment, the two Jordans mirrored each other. Then the one in the tree smiled. Too wide. The radio screamed with static. The real Jordan shouted, "Get in the truck." They bolted, stumbling through dirt and brush, Caleb clutching the radio, its antenna rattling as it continued to spit out broken words. "Don't trust the eyes." Behind them, the mimic Jordan laughed again, the sound cutting in and out like a broken recording. When they reached the truck, Caleb slammed the doors, fumbled the keys, and gunned the engine. Headlights cut across the clearing. For a split second, they saw it, the mimic, standing in the middle of the road. Identical. Smiling. And then, as the lights hit, it dropped to all fours and scuttled into the brush, faster than anything human. Caleb told me they didn't stop driving until they hit pavement again. They swore they'd kept the recording, that they could prove what they heard. But when they played back the tape, the signal was gone. Only static remained. Except for 1 second. At the very end of the reel, just before the tape cut, a voice whispered, low, distorted, and chilling, "We hear you too." That was the fourth story. 4 nights. 4 warnings. But the truth is, these aren't isolated. They're fragments of something much larger. Because whatever walks in the wild doesn't just stay there. It follows. And if you're unlucky, it finds you. Chapter 10. Never Camp Alone. Outro. 4 stories. 4 warnings. And yet, every year, campers, hunters, and hikers vanish in the deserts and forests of the Southwest. Some are found. Most aren't. Authorities chalk it up to accidents, getting lost, falling into ravines, succumbing to exposure. But those who live near the Navajo Nation whisper something else. That what takes people doesn't leave footprints like ours. That it doesn't breathe like we do. That it wears us when it wants to. Daniel survived, but only by leaving behind a piece of himself. Marcus Hayes never made it back at all, his journal ending with 3 haunting words. A family was stalked by something that whistled lullabies in their children's voices. And Caleb and Jordan heard the last transmission, a voice warning them, and perhaps warning all of us, that sometimes the thing outside isn't just waiting. It's already here. 4 different stories. 4 different encounters. But they share a common truth. You are never truly alone in the wilderness. So the next time you're out under the stars, with only a thin canvas tent or the shell of your car between you and the night, listen closely. If you hear laughter that shouldn't be there, if you hear whistling in the dark, if you see yourself staring back at you from the tree line, don't look twice. Don't follow. Run. Because once it notices you, it never forgets. Final note, these stories are said to be true. Maybe they're folklore, warnings passed down through generations. Or maybe they're records of something far older, something that watches the campsites and waits for the next firelight to flicker. Believe what you want. But remember this, The wilderness does not belong to us. And when the night grows too quiet, you might not like what finally answers back.